The sun had begun its slow goodnight over the quiet, lakeside town of Oakhaven. Long, soft, orange shadows stretched across the perfectly cut lawns of Sycamore Street. To someone just passing through, Oakhaven looked like a picture-perfect place. The kind of town where nothing bad ever happened. The loudest sounds were usually just a lawnmower in the afternoon or the gentle ring of a church bell far away. But on this particular Tuesday evening in late autumn, the silence felt different. It was heavy, like a secret held too long. Felt brittle, ready to break. At the very center of this heavy quiet sat the Miller residence. It was a simple two-story house, like many others on the street. But this house was now the focus of a tragedy that was hard to understand. This wasn't a story about a bad person breaking in, or a sudden, angry fight. This was something far more troubling. It was the story of how a whole neighborhood stayed silent, how many small warning signs were missed, and how, slowly, little by little, a man's life was taken from him. It was a story of a silent kind of harm. Julian Miller was 42 years old. He was a man who worked with old papers and maps at the local history office. He was a quiet man, always very polite. His life was full of careful habits and exact times. People knew him for his light brown coat and how carefully he arranged his shopping cart at the store. Julian was not a man who liked arguments. In fact, he seemed to spend most of his time trying to avoid any kind of trouble. Neighbors said he was respectful but kept to himself. He would wave from his porch, but he never stopped to talk for long. Julian had lived in Oakhaven for 15 years. He was always there, a part of the background, but in many ways no one truly knew him. He was the man who kept his garden perfect and his windows shining, yet no one could remember the last time they saw him smile. He was a man living at the very edge of his own life, like a faint shadow moving through a world full of bright colors. He was there, but he was not truly seen. The story of Julian's last days starts with some very ordinary moments that, when we look back, held a lot of meaning. On the Friday before he disappeared, Julian went to the local post office. The lady who worked there, Martha, had known Julian for many years. She remembered that day he seemed very distracted. He had forgotten his wallet, something he had never done before. He kept looking at himself in the glass door, as if he was searching for something in his own face. He didn't have any cuts or bruises, but he looked deeply, deeply tired. He said sorry many times, his voice barely a whisper, before leaving quickly. It was a small moment, easy to forget then, but it was the first tiny crack in the perfect wall of his daily routine. By Saturday, the feeling in the neighborhood had changed. People living on Sycamore Street later said they felt a strange sense of worry, but they couldn't explain why. Someone saw a dark car parked at the very end of the street. It didn't belong to anyone who lived there, and it didn't have a license plate. People saw it, they noticed it, and then they looked away. They went back to their dinners, their TV shows, and their own quiet lives. This was the first example of the whole neighborhood looking past something. It wasn't that no one saw anything. It was that everyone decided that someone else would surely take care of it. In Oakhaven, not getting involved was almost like a silent rule. On Sunday evening, Julian Miller was seen for the very last time by a neighbor. He was doing his usual task, taking out his trash. He always did this at exactly 8 p.m. every Sunday. A neighbor named Sarah Jennings was walking her dog and gave him a short nod. She noticed something strange. Julian's front door was standing wide open, and the lights inside his house were flickering on and off. It looked very out of place for a house that was usually so perfectly kept. Sarah thought about asking if he was okay, but the cold wind was biting at her face, and her dog was pulling hard on its leash, wanting to go home. So she kept walking. She told herself that Julian was a private man and wouldn't like her asking questions. In that moment, the chance to help him disappeared. The door closed, the lights went dark, and Julian Miller slipped out of sight. When Julian did not come to work at the Historical Society on Monday morning, his absence was noted. But no one did anything right away. His boss, Mr. Henderson, thought Julian was just taking a sick day, which he rarely did. It wasn't until Tuesday afternoon, when Julian missed a very important meeting about Old Town papers, that the police were finally called to check on him. Officer Sean arrived at the house at 4:30 p.m. The scene he found was chillingly normal. The mail had been brought in, the dishes were clean and drying in the sink, and Julian's beige coat was hanging neatly by the door. But Julian himself was nowhere to be found. The police started their search. They looked through the house carefully, but found no signs of a struggle. Nothing was broken, and it didn't look like anyone had forced their way in. There were no valuable things missing, so it wasn't a robbery. However, as the officers looked deeper into the house, they started to find digital footprints that Julian had left behind. His laptop was open on his desk. It showed a history of many quick, worried searches. He hadn't been looking for help from people. He had been looking for a way to disappear from his own life. He had been researching old fights over land in the town, the rules about neighborhood watching, and, most sadly, how being alone for a long time can hurt your mind. It became clear that Julian felt like he was being watched, not by a criminal, but by the very community he lived in. The news of Julian's disappearance caused a strange kind of shock in Oakhaven. In the days that followed, instead of coming together to help find him, the neighborhood seemed to pull apart. People became defensive about why they hadn't done more. "He was a quiet man," became the common saying. "We didn't want to get involved in his business." This way of protecting themselves was the first big clue for the main detective, Elena Vance. She realized that the mystery wasn't just about what happened to Julian, but about the kind of place that allowed it to happen. She started to look into the neighborhood association, a group known for its very strict rules about how houses should look and its quiet but strong way of controlling social life. As Detective Vance looked through old emails and messages from the community, a worrying pattern appeared. Julian had been the target of a long, quiet attack of being left out. It started with small things. He was not invited to the yearly block party. Someone quietly complained about the color of his porch light. An anonymous note was left about his grass being a tiny bit too long. These weren't crimes like stealing or hitting someone, but they were like many small pokes and jabs at his mind. Over many years, this slow, constant pressure had made Julian feel totally alone. His home, which should have been a safe place, had become a prison of unspoken rules and judgment. The dark car that was seen on the night he disappeared turned out to be from a private detective. This detective was hired by the neighborhood association to write down all of Julian's odd behavior to try to make him sell his house. The big breakthrough came from an unexpected place. The video from a doorbell camera a few houses down the street. While Julian's own security camera system had mysteriously stopped working, a neighbor's camera recorded a series of visitors on the night he vanished. These were not friendly visits. The video showed 3 important people from the community standing on Julian's porch. Their body language was strong and demanding. They were not there to hurt him physically, but they were there to fix the Julian problem once and for all. They wanted him out of their perfect neighborhood, and they had decided that that evening was the final deadline. This moment, the confrontation, was the psychological turning point for Julian. The air was cold, and the streetlights of Sycamore Street cast a harsh, almost clinical light on Julian Miller's porch. The 3 figures, the bank manager, the head of the PDA, and the retired judge, stood in a half-circle, boxing Julian in, creating a kind of social cage on his own porch. The bank manager leaning in, his voice low and formal, like a business deal.
"Julian, let's be realistic. We've looked at the records for your property. The Historical Society doesn't pay you enough to keep this house looking the way we all expect. We have a buyer, a family who will actually help the value of everyone's homes. You're sitting on something you can't properly care for. It's time to settle the debt you owe this community. Moving out will be best for all of us."
The PDA head, crossing her arms, a tight, fake smile on her face.
"It's about the children, Julian. They walk past your house every day and they see someone who doesn't quite fit in. You don't come to the meetings. You don't help with the garden projects. You're a blank spot on our street, Julian. People are starting to wonder why you're so secretive. It makes the other parents uneasy. Don't you want to live somewhere where you're truly wanted?"
The retired judge, speaking in a tone that felt like a final decision.
"I've spent 40 years dealing with people who don't follow the rules, Miller. You think you're being private, but we see it as a lack of respect. We've written down every single problem: the grass, the lights, your late night walks. If you don't sign this agreement to sell your house tonight, we will make sure the city's building rules office and the historical society hear every single detail we've gathered. We will make your life here very public and very difficult. The choice is yours, but your time has run out.
Julian said nothing. He looked from one face to the other, then past them, to the dark windows of his other neighbors' homes. No one was opening their door. No one was stepping out. The total lack of anyone to help him was the final, devastating blow. He realized he was utterly alone. Through careful checking of Julian's phone and the messages between his neighbors, the investigators slowly put together the final hours. On that Sunday night, after the three neighbors left, Julian sat in his house alone. He had lived there for 15 years, but in that moment, he felt like he had no friends and no home left. The constant pressure of years of being left out, combined with this last, direct attack, broke something inside him. He didn't fight back. He simply walked out his back door and into the thick woods that bordered the lake. He left his coat, his phone, and his old life behind. He walked until he could walk no more. The legal part of the case was as complex as the events themselves. The three community members were not charged with murder, as there was no proof of physical harm or a plan to kill him. However, they were eventually charged with harassment and with trying to trick Julian into selling his land. The case became an important example for discussing how far psychological bullying can go and what a community owes to its people. The trial showed the hidden, dark side of perfect neighborhoods, where the strong desire for everything to be the same can become a dangerous weapon. The town of Oakhaven was left to deal with a very uncomfortable truth. They hadn't pulled a trigger, but they had created the perfect conditions for a man's total disappearance. Julian's body was found 2 weeks later in a quiet, open space near the lake, his favorite spot for watching birds. He had died from being out in the cold, curled up as if in a deep sleep. He was finally free from the judging eyes of his neighbors. There was no violence in his passing, only a deep, heartbreaking loneliness. The community's help in his death was not through action, but through the absence of it. It was the silence when he needed someone to speak up, the turned heads when he needed someone to see, and the closed doors when he needed a hand. The murder that everyone helped commit was not one person's evil act, but a huge failure of kindness by many. In the end, the Miller house was never sold to the developer. It stood empty for many years, a silent monument to the man who lived there and the community that failed him. The garden grew wild, the windows gathered dust, and the once perfect lawn became a mess of weeds. It was a clear reminder that a healthy community is not measured by how tall its fences are or how pretty its houses look. It is measured by how it treats its most vulnerable people. The story of Julian Miller remains a chilling study in how powerful being left out can be, and how damaging it is when many people simply don't care. It serves as a warning that sometimes the most dangerous thing in a neighborhood isn't the stranger in the dark, but the neighbor in the light who chooses not to see. The story of Oakhaven and Julian Miller asks us to look more closely at our own surroundings. It asks us to think about the small interactions we have every day and how much they can mean. It reminds us that silence is not always a good thing. Sometimes, it is a very loud roar of neglect. As we go through our lives, we must remember that every person we meet is a whole world in themselves, and they deserve respect and connection. The sad part of Julian Miller's story was not that he was forgotten, but that he was slowly, surely erased by the very people who should have known him best. In the quiet streets of Oakhaven, the orange shadows still fall, but they can no longer hide the truth of what happened on that cold autumn night. Thank you for spending this time with us to think about the complicated ways people behave and the hidden problems that can exist even in the most beautiful places. If you found this case thought-provoking, please think about subscribing to the channel and sharing your ideas about how important community and mental health awareness are in the comments below. Your involvement helps us continue to tell these stories with the respect and understanding they deserve. Until next time, stay aware, be kind, and remember that every story has many layers hidden beneath the surface. Good night.